I never thought I would be the one to save the company. It seemed impossible when I first walked through those broken doors. The office was a shell of its former self. Debt collectors circling like vultures, employees packing up their desks, and a once thriving business teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. But by the time I left, I had turned that failing company into a billion-dollar empire. And yet, they fired me. How could they do that? How could they fire the very person who had revived the company from the brink of disaster, someone who was hailed as the hero just months before? Let me take you on a journey of triumph, betrayal, and the raw reality of business. A story where I went from the golden child to the villain in my own company. This is the true story of how I turned a dying business into a $1 billion profit, and why they decided to let me go. When I first joined, the company seemed like a sinking ship. Their tech was outdated, customer satisfaction was at an all-time low, and they were deep in debt. The office was filled with a sense of defeat, and the once promising brand was now just a shadow of what it used to be. The leadership was fragmented, with Greg, the CEO, at the helm. He was a seasoned businessman, but when it came to technology and innovation, he was out of his depth. His approach to business had worked in the past, but now it was clear that the world had moved on. The company was desperate for change, and they brought me in as their last hope. I was supposed to be the one to fix everything, revive the technology, rebuild the brand, and restore the company's relevance in an increasingly digital world. But the moment I walked in, I was seen as an outsider. People were skeptical of my ideas, resistant to change, and the culture was entrenched in old ways. There was a sense of distrust, and it felt like I had to fight for every inch of progress. The odds were stacked against me, but I knew that if anyone could pull them from the brink, it was going to be me. Fusion X wasn't a stroke of genius overnight. It was born out of desperation, sleepless nights, and a deep understanding of what was missing in the market. I could see the cracks in the system clearly, the inefficiencies, the outdated processes, the constant struggle to stay competitive. What this company needed wasn't just another product or a quick fix. They needed a complete overhaul. That's when I started to envision Fusion X, an AI-driven cloud solution designed to streamline business operations and deliver real-time data analytics. It wasn't just about improving things, it was about revolutionizing how the entire business worked. I spent countless nights coding, brainstorming, tweaking algorithms, and navigating a sea of technical challenges. Every time I hit a wall, I would push through, knowing that the breakthrough was just around the corner. But I wasn't just facing technical hurdles, I was up against skepticism from the higher-ups. Greg, the CEO, didn't fully grasp the potential of Fusion X. He was used to traditional ways of doing business and questioned whether a tech-heavy platform could really solve the company's problems. Resources were scarce, and the budget for innovation was tighter than ever. Still, I refused to give up. The platform wasn't perfect when it launched, but it was a start. Initially, there was doubt from both inside and outside the company. But slowly, the results began to show. Clients started to take notice, revenue began to rise, and the company's operations were becoming more streamlined. It wasn't instant, but Fusion X was working, and that was all I needed to keep pushing forward. In just 2 years, the numbers were undeniable. We went from being on the brink of bankruptcy to hitting a $100 million profit. The buzz around Fusion was louder than ever, and customers flocked to the platform eager to experience the game-changing solution we had created. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. The company was turning around, the technology was working, and I was finally seeing the fruits of all those sleepless nights. The revenue climbed steadily, and Fusion X was credited with being the catalyst behind the revival of the company. I had done it. I had saved the business. But success, as it often does, came with its own set of problems. With the company's rapid growth, tensions began to surface. Greg, the CEO, who had once been my ally, started to feel threatened. My growing prominence was beginning to overshadow his, and that made him uncomfortable. As Fusion X gained more recognition, I found myself at the center of attention, while Greg faded into the background. The board, too, began to question my role. They saw the money rolling in and couldn't ignore my contribution. But they also started to wonder whether I had become too important to the company. The internal conflict was palpable. Greg's leadership seemed less effective in comparison to my innovation and vision, and the jealousy within the boardroom simmered. It was clear that my success, while celebrated by the public and customers, was causing deep rifts inside the company, rifts that would ultimately lead to my downfall. As the company grew, so did my resentment. I had turned this place around, built it from the ground up, and yet, with every success, it felt like I was being pushed further into the shadows. Greg, once my partner in this journey, had begun to undermine me in subtle and not so subtle ways. At first, it was small things. Being excluded from key meetings, my suggestions being dismissed, and my decisions questioned by Greg and some members of the board. But it didn't stop there. The tension started to escalate. I noticed that my contributions were downplayed in favor of Greg's vision. He would speak at length in meetings, presenting ideas I had developed as his own, painting Fusion X as something he had always imagined. It was as if the very foundation I had built was being claimed by someone else. The emotional toll was immense. I had sacrificed so much, long nights, weekends, even relationships, all for this company. And now I was being erased. I worked harder than ever, sacrificing even more to prove my worth, but the more I gave, the more I was pushed out of the decision-making process. It felt like I was no longer part of the company I had saved, but rather an afterthought in a game I no longer recognized. Greg had reasserted control, and every corner I turned, it felt like the walls were closing in. The success that had once been mine to celebrate now seemed like a constant reminder of how easily it could all slip away. It happened at the annual shareholders' meeting. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I had prepared for this event like I had for everything else, carefully, meticulously, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. Greg stepped up to the podium with that familiar, confident smile of his, but as he began to speak, I felt a coldness creep over me. "We're entering a new era for this company," Greg announced, his voice booming with an artificial excitement that made my stomach churn. "It's time to bring in a new leadership team." My heart skipped a beat, but it wasn't until he continued that I realized something was terribly wrong, and Jack Larson will no longer be part of this journey. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. My mind raced in disbelief. The room felt like it was closing in around me, and I couldn't make sense of the words. No longer be part of this journey? I had poured everything into this company. Every ounce of energy, every hour I sacrificed, every idea I had put into Fusion X. I had single-handedly turned this place around, and now they were telling me that none of it mattered. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This was it. I was being fired, not just fired, exiled, publicly humiliated in front of everyone who had once looked up to me. The company I had saved, the empire I had built from the ashes, was now stripping me away like a piece of debris in the wind. I looked around at the faces in the room, some sympathetic, some indifferent. Greg's smug expression never wavered. The board, silent, nodded in approval. My hands trembled, my mind a blur. I had never imagined it would end this way, not after everything I had sacrificed. How could this happen? How could they take everything I had worked for and discard it so easily? I stood there, frozen, as the ground beneath me seemed to slip away. My world had just crumbled. All my hard work, my sacrifices, thrown away like they never mattered. I spent weeks in a daze, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. The media coverage was brutal. Headlines splashed my name in a way I never imagined, with the word "fired" following it like a shadow. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected. How could the company I had saved turn on me so quickly? How could Greg and the board, people I had worked alongside, discard me as if I were nothing? The disbelief was suffocating at first, and there were moments when it felt like I might never recover from the emotional fallout. But slowly, the fog began to lift. I came to realize that I had created something bigger than myself. Fusion X wasn't just a product. It was a legacy. The company might have pushed me out, but they could never erase what I had built. That was mine to keep. The pain of betrayal will always linger, but I found strength in knowing that I had achieved what others thought impossible. And while the company's success was now tainted with the sting of injustice, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't done. In time, I would rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. The world had seen what I was capable of, and this wasn't the end of my story. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. Sometimes the hardest part of success isn't achieving it. It's dealing with the consequences. But through all the betrayal, the pain, and the public humiliation, I've learned invaluable lessons. Success is fleeting, but the strength and resilience you build along the way stay with you forever. No one can take away what I've created, not the platform, not the vision, and certainly not the drive that fuels me. I'll be back. And next time, I'll be stronger, wiser, and more prepared. The world hasn't seen the last of me. In fact, it's only a matter of time before I turn this setback into the fuel for something even greater. The journey isn't over, it's just beginning. I'll rise again, and this time, nothing will stand in my way.